Billionaire humbled after meeting his maid's mother. You won't believe what he did. Alexander Chen stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a kingdom of steel and glass. At 33, he had everything the world told him to want: a tech empire worth billions, properties on 3 continents, and a name that made investors salivate and competitors tremble. Forbes had just named him one of the most influential entrepreneurs under 40. Yet as he stared at his reflection in the pristine glass, he saw a man who had forgotten how to smile without a camera present. Mr. Chen, I've finished with the living areas. Should I start on the library? The soft voice belonged to Maria Rodriguez, his housekeeper of 6 months. She stood at a respectful distance, her cleaning supplies organized in a caddy she carried with practiced efficiency. Alexander barely glanced her way.
Fine.
And Maria, the guest bathroom fixtures need more attention. I noticed water spots yesterday. Yes, sir. I apologize. Her voice remained steady, professional, though he thought he detected a slight tremor. He returned to his laptop, already dismissing her from his thoughts. In his world, people like Maria were invisible infrastructure, like the elevators that carried him or the air conditioning that kept his penthouse at exactly 68 degrees. She came 3 times a week, cleaned for 8 hours, and left without fanfare. He knew almost nothing about her beyond her punctuality and the fact that she made his marble floors gleam like mirrors. Maria was 27, though Alexander had never asked her age. She moved through his vast apartment with quiet grace, her dark hair always pulled back in a neat bun, her uniform immaculate despite the physical demands of her work. She had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled, though she rarely smiled around him. His demeanor didn't invite warmth. What Alexander didn't know was that Maria left his penthouse each evening and took 2 subway trains to a small apartment in Queens, where she cared for her elderly mother. He didn't know that she worked 2 other cleaning jobs to pay for her mother's medications, or that she had once dreamed of becoming a teacher before life had rearranged her priorities. He didn't know that she sometimes paused while dusting his bookshelves, running her fingers along the spines of novels she longed to read but had no time for. That evening, as Maria prepared to leave, she hesitated at the door. Mr. Chen, I need to request next Friday off. It's my mother's birthday, and I'd like to spend the day with her. Alexander looked up from his tablet, irritation flickering across his features. That's inconvenient. I'm hosting a dinner party next Saturday. The apartment needs to be perfect. I can come on Thursday and work extra hours, Maria offered quickly. And I'll be back on Monday. Everything will be ready, I promise. He waved his hand dismissively.
Fine.
But nothing can be out of place for that dinner. My investors will be here. Thank you, Mr. Chen. I really appreciate it. The gratitude in her voice was genuine, though it barely registered with him. After she left, Alexander returned to his evening routine, reviewing quarterly reports, checking Asian markets, responding to emails from executives in 7 time zones. He ate a Michelin-starred meal delivered from a restaurant he'd never actually visited, consumed it while reading market analyses, and tasted almost nothing. This was success, he told himself. This was what he'd worked for since he'd coded his first app at 16, dropped out of Harvard at 19, and launched the platform that had made him wealthy beyond imagination. The following week passed in its usual blur of meetings, acquisitions, and the delicate manipulation of markets and men. Alexander barely noticed when Thursday came and Maria arrived early, working with unusual intensity. She cleaned areas that were already spotless, organized his already organized closets, and left his penthouse gleaming like a palace. Friday came, and the apartment felt strangely empty without her presence, though Alexander couldn't have explained why. He'd never paid attention to her before. Why should her absence register now? Yet he found himself noticing small things. Fresh flowers she must have arranged before leaving, the way she'd positioned his coffee table books at aesthetically pleasing angles, the subtle scent of lavender from whatever eco-friendly products she used. Saturday evening arrived with its parade of wealth. 15 investors and their spouses filled his living room, drinking champagne that cost more per bottle than Maria made in a week. They admired his art collection, his view, his taste. They laughed at his jokes and hung on his insights about market trends and emerging technologies. He was brilliant, charming, the man who had decoded the algorithm of success. But as the evening wore on, Alexander found himself strangely detached, watching the scene as if from outside his own body. These people didn't know him. They knew his portfolio, his achievements, his potential to make them richer. When they asked about his life, they meant his company. When they complimented his home, they were calculating its value. By the time the last guest departed at midnight, he felt more alone than he had in months. He stood again at his windows, looking out at the city that never slept, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to wonder if somewhere in those millions of lit windows, there were people who gathered not to network or negotiate, but simply to celebrate another year of someone's life. People like Maria and her mother, he supposed, though he couldn't quite imagine what that would look like. He pushed the thought away and went to bed, never suspecting that his entire world was about to be turned upside down by a woman he'd never met and a lesson he desperately needed to learn. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Manhattan feel almost livable. Alexander was in his home office by 6, as usual, navigating a crisis with his European division. A competitor had launched a suspiciously similar product, and his legal team was screaming about intellectual property theft while his marketing department demanded an immediate response. By 9 o'clock, he'd forgotten entirely that Maria should have arrived. By 10, when his phone rang with an unknown number, he almost didn't answer. "Mr. Chen?" The voice was unfamiliar, heavily accented, and thick with emotion. "Who is this? How did you get this number?" "My name is Rosa Martinez. I'm calling about Maria Rodriguez. She works for you." Alexander's irritation sharpened. "If this is about scheduling, she needs to call me herself. She's in the hospital." The words cut through his self-importance like a blade. "There was an accident this morning. The subway, there was a man who fell, and Maria, she tried to help him, but she fell too, onto the tracks. She's alive, Mr. Chen, thank God, but she's hurt badly." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Alexander sat down, his mind struggling to process this information. Maria, quiet, invisible Maria, was in a hospital somewhere injured. It felt unreal, like hearing about a character from a television show he barely watched. I'm sorry to hear that," he managed. "Why are you calling me?" "Maria, before they took her to surgery, she was worried. About her jobs, about her mother. She said you had a dinner party and she wasn't there to prepare, and she was so scared you'd fire her. Even with her leg broken and her head bleeding, she was worried about losing her job." Rosa's voice cracked. "I found your number in her phone listed as Mr. Chen, do not miss calls. I thought you should know." The words hit harder than they should have. Even injured, possibly seriously, Maria had been thinking about his dinner party, about failing him. What kind of fear had he instilled in her that this was her priority while being loaded into an ambulance? "Which hospital?" he heard himself ask. "Elmhurst Hospital in Queens." "But Mr. Chen, I'm not calling to ask you to visit. I'm calling because Maria's mother, she doesn't know yet. I can't reach her. She doesn't have a cell phone, and Maria made me promise not to tell her until we knew more. But now they're saying Maria will be here for days, maybe weeks, and someone needs to check on her mother. Mrs. Rodriguez, she has diabetes, heart problems. She depends on Maria for everything." Alexander felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest, a mix of guilt, responsibility, and something he couldn't quite name. "What do you need from me?" "In Maria's phone, there's an address for her apartment. Could you send someone? Just to check on her mother, to make sure she has food, her medicines? I would go myself, but I'm at the hospital, and I don't want to leave Maria alone." He could easily send someone, his assistant, to service anyone. But instead, he found himself saying, "Text me the address. I'll go myself." The silence on the other end was heavy with surprise. You'll go yourself?" "Yes." "What's her mother's name?" "Esperanza Rodriguez. She's 66, and she doesn't speak much English. And Mr. Chen? Please be gentle with her. Maria is her whole world." After hanging up, Alexander sat motionless for several minutes. His calendar was packed: a board meeting at noon, a conference call with Tokyo at 2, a dinner with venture capitalists at 7. He could send anyone to check on an old woman in Queens. He should send someone else. Instead, he found himself canceling his meetings, ignoring his assistant's shocked protests, and calling for his car. 40 minutes later, his driver pulled up to a modest apartment building in a neighborhood Alexander had never visited, despite living in New York for a decade. The building was clean but aging, with worn steps and faded paint. It was a world away from his penthouse, yet it stood solid, full of life. Children's voices echoing in the stairwell, the smell of cooking drifting from various apartments, a small community bulletin board covered with handwritten notices in multiple languages. He found apartment 3C and knocked. The door opened a crack, held by a chain, and a small woman peered out. Esperanza Rodriguez had silver hair pulled back like her daughter's, the same kind eyes, but her face was lined with 66 years of life that had clearly not been easy. She wore a simple house dress and slippers, and she looked at him with confusion and a hint of fear. "Mrs. Rodriguez? I'm Alexander Chen. I employ your daughter, Maria." Her eyes widened. "Maria?" She spoke rapidly in Spanish, of which Alexander understood nothing, but her anxiety was universal. He held up his hands in what he hoped was a calming gesture. "Maria is okay. She's in the hospital, but she's okay." He pulled out his phone, fumbling for a translation app he'd never had reason to use before. After several awkward attempts, he managed to communicate that Maria had been in an accident but was alive, that he was here to help, that everything would be all right. Esperanza's legs seemed to give way. Alexander caught her elbow, helping her to a worn sofa in the small living room. The apartment was tiny. Everything his penthouse was not, but it was immaculate, decorated with care, if not money. Family photos covered every surface, and he recognized Maria in various stages of life: a gap-toothed child, a teenager in a graduation gown, a young woman with her arm around this same elderly woman, both of them smiling with uncomplicated joy. "I need to go to her," Esperanza said in halting English, attempting to stand. "My daughter, I need to see her." "Yes, I'll take you," Alexander said, surprising himself again. "But first, have you eaten today? Do you have your medications?" Over the next hour, as Alexander helped Esperanza gather what she needed for a hospital visit, he learned more about his maid's life than he had in 6 months of employing her. He saw the carefully organized pill containers labeled in Maria's handwriting, the sparse refrigerator that nonetheless held a lovingly prepared meal for her mother, the small shrine in the corner with candles and photos of people who were clearly no longer alive. He learned that Maria's father had died in a construction accident when she was 15, that she had a younger brother who'd been deported 3 years ago, that she'd given up a scholarship to community college to care for her mother. He learned all of this through broken English, translation apps, and the kind of patience he'd never had to exercise before. As they prepared to leave for the hospital, Esperanza clutched his arm. "You are a good man," she said, her accent thick, but her meaning clear. "Maria said you were important man, very busy. Thank you for coming." Alexander felt something crack inside him. A good man. When was the last time anyone had called him that? Important, yes. Successful, brilliant, visionary. He heard those words weakly. But good? In the car ride to Elmhurst Hospital, with Esperanza clutching a rosary and whispering prayers beside him, Alexander Chen began to understand that he'd been living in a very small world despite his enormous wealth, and that perhaps the invisible people he'd spent years not seeing were the ones who could teach him what it meant to be rich. Elmhurst Hospital was a world away from the concierge medical services Alexander was accustomed to. The emergency room bustled with humanity in all its messy, urgent reality: crying children, exhausted nurses moving with practiced efficiency, the smell of antiseptic mixing with too many people in too small a space. Alexander's Armani suit drew curious glances, marking him as clearly out of place. Esperanza moved through the chaos with purpose, her earlier fragility replaced by maternal determination. A nurse directed them to the 4th floor, and as they rode the elevator in silence, Alexander noticed the older woman's hands trembling as they clutched her purse. She's strong, he found himself saying, though he barely knew Maria at all. Your daughter is strong. Esperanza looked at him with eyes that had seen too much loss. She is strong because she must be. But everyone needs someone to be strong for them sometimes, no? The words settled over him like a weight. They found Maria in a shared room, curtains drawn around her bed. Rosa Martinez, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and in nurse's scrubs, stood when they entered. She embraced Esperanza, speaking rapidly in Spanish, then turned to Alexander with surprise. You actually came, she said. I didn't think. How is she? Alexander interrupted, uncomfortable with what Rosa had almost said. Broken leg, fractured ribs, concussion. They operated on her leg this morning. She's sedated now, but stable. The doctors say she was lucky. It could have been so much worse. Lucky. Alexander looked at the figure in the hospital bed and struggled to apply that word. Maria lay small and still beneath white sheets, her usually neat hair spread across the pillow, her face pale except for the bruising that was already blooming across her left cheek. And 4 drip fed into her arm, and her right leg was elevated in a cast. Esperanza let out a sound that was half sob, half prayer, and moved to her daughter's bedside. She took Maria's hand carefully, mindful of the 4, and began speaking in Spanish, her voice breaking with emotion. Alexander stood awkwardly near the door, suddenly aware that he was intruding on something private and profound. This was love, raw and uncomplicated, a mother's anguish for her injured child. When had he last inspired such emotion in anyone? When had he last felt it himself? Mr. Chen. Rosa touched his elbow, guiding him back into the hallway. Thank you for bringing Mrs. Rodriguez. I know you're a busy man. What happened exactly? He asked. On the subway. Rosa's expression darkened. A man, drunk or high, who knows, stumbled onto the tracks at the station. Maria was right there when it happened. Everyone else just stood there, screaming or filming on their phones, but Maria, she jumped down to help him. She got him to the side just before the train came, but she couldn't get herself up in time. A stranger pulled her up, but not before her leg caught the platform edge. Alexander felt sick. She risked her life for a stranger. That's who Maria is, Rosa said simply. She sees someone who needs help and she helps. It doesn't matter if they're a stranger on a subway or a billionaire who doesn't even know her favorite color. The rebuke was gentle but unmistakable. Alexander looked through the doorway at Esperanza, still holding her daughter's hand, still praying. What happens now? He asked. With her recovery, her life? Rosa sighed. 6 to 8 weeks before she can put weight on that leg. Months of physical therapy after that. She has no insurance beyond the emergency Medicaid, which won't cover much. She'll lose all 3 of her jobs, lose her income. The apartment rent is due in 2 weeks, and her mother's medications alone cost $300 a month. She paused, then added quietly, Maria was already working herself to exhaustion. I don't know how she'll come back from this. The practical problems piled up in Alexander's mind, each one solvable with resources he could access with a phone call. But something stopped him from immediately offering money. Some instinct told him that writing a check would be too easy, too much like his usual method of making problems disappear without actually engaging with them. I want to help, he said instead. But I don't know how. Not really. Rosa studied him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You came today. You brought her mother. That's already more than most employers would do. It's not enough. Then ask yourself what would be. And Mr. Chen? Whatever you decide, make sure it's for Maria, not for your conscience. The words stung, because they were true. How much of his impulse to help was about Maria, and how much was about alleviating his own discomfort at being confronted with the fragility of lives he'd never bothered to consider. He returned to the room, where Maria was beginning to stir. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then landing on her mother's face. She smiled weakly and whispered something in Spanish. Then her gaze found Alexander, and confusion crossed her bruised features. Mr. Chen? Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. What? Why are you? Rest, he said, moving closer despite his discomfort. Don't worry about anything. Your apartment, your mother, your job, I'll take care of it all. Tears spilled from her eyes. I'm so sorry about your penthouse. The cleaning, I tried to make sure everything was ready before. Stop. The word came out harsher than he intended. He softened his voice. Maria, you were hit by a train trying to save someone's life. The state of my apartment is the least important thing in the world right now. She looked at him as if he'd spoken a foreign language. In a way, he supposed he had. In the 6 months she'd worked for him, he'd never once indicated that anything mattered more than his convenience. The man, she whispered. The one who fell. Is he okay? Even now, injured and terrified about her future, she was asking about a stranger. Alexander felt something fundamental shift inside him. I'll find out, he promised. You just focus on healing. Over the next 2 hours, he sat in that hospital room, mostly silent, watching Esperanza tend to her daughter with a gentleness that spoke of years of practice. He observed how Maria, even in pain, tried to comfort her mother. How she apologized repeatedly for worrying her. How she asked about whether her mother had eaten, had taken her pills, was feeling all right. The love between them was so tangible it filled the small room, and Alexander realized with sudden clarity that this simple, profound connection between two people was something his billions couldn't buy. He'd spent years building an empire, networking with the powerful, acquiring things he didn't need, and yet he couldn't remember the last time anyone had looked at him the way Esperanza looked at Maria, or the way Maria looked at her mother. As evening approached, a nurse came in to check Maria's vitals and administer more pain medication. She needs to rest now, she said gently but firmly. Family can come back in the morning. Esperanza looked torn, unwilling to leave her daughter. Alexander made a decision. Mrs. Rodriguez will stay tonight, he told the nurse. In the room, in a chair if necessary. I'll arrange for a cot. The nurse looked skeptical. That's against. I'll handle it, Alexander said with the quiet authority of someone used to making things happen. 10 minutes and one conversation with the hospital administrator later, a cot was being set up in Maria's room. As he prepared to leave, Esperanza caught his hand. You are Angel, she said, her eyes shining. God sent you to us. The words should have been ridiculous, should have bounced off his cynicism. Instead, they landed somewhere deep in his chest and stayed there, a small warmth against the cold he'd carried for so long. In his car on the way back to Manhattan, Alexander stared out at the city lights and realized that he couldn't remember the last time he'd gone an entire day without checking his stock portfolio, without thinking about acquisitions or market share or the next big thing. He'd spent the day focused entirely on other people's needs, and the world hadn't ended. His company hadn't collapsed. The only thing that had changed was something inside him, something that was just beginning to wake up after years of sleep. When he finally reached his penthouse at 9 p.m., it felt cavernous and cold despite the perfect temperature control. He stood at his windows again, but this time instead of seeing his kingdom, he saw millions of lives he'd never considered. People like Maria, working multiple jobs to care for their families, risking everything for strangers, finding joy in a simple birthday celebration. And for the first time in his adult life, Alexander Chin felt genuinely poor. Alexander woke Tuesday morning with a determination that surprised him. His first call was to his executive assistant. Clear my calendar for the week, he said. Sir, you have the board meeting today and the Tokyo investors arrive tomorrow. I said clear it. Push the board meeting to next week. Send my apologies to Tokyo and reschedule. Everything non-essential gets delegated. The shocked silence on the other end spoke volumes. In 10 years of working together, he'd never canceled a board meeting. His second call was to his personal attorney. I need you to set up a medical fund, anonymously. I'll send you details. Also, I want information on the best orthopedic surgeons in New York, and I need someone to navigate hospital billing and insurance issues. By noon, he'd ensured Maria would receive top-tier care regardless of her insurance status. By 2 p.m., he'd paid 3 months of her rent in advance, arranging it through a fictional employee assistance program so she wouldn't know it came from him personally. By 4, he was back in Queens, checking on Esperanza. The older woman was surprised to see him, still in her daughter's apartment, holding a photo album she'd been crying over. Alexander sat with her, and through patient use of translation apps and her broken English, he learned about the family in those photos. Maria's father, Roberto, who died when unsafe scaffolding collapsed. Her brother, Miguel, deported during an immigration raid despite having lived in the U.S. since he was 2 years old. The grandmother who'd raised Maria with stories of their village in Mexico, who'd passed away 5 years ago. Maria carries them all, Esperanza said, touching the photos. All the ones we lost. She works so hard because she is working for all of us, you understand? She is the dream that survived. That evening, Alexander returned to the hospital. Maria was awake, still in pain but clearer-headed. When she saw him, confusion flickered across her face again. "You came back," she said. "I wanted to check on you." He pulled up a chair, suddenly awkward. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a train," she said, then managed a small smile. "That's a joke. Because I did get hit by, well, almost." Her attempt at humor, even now, struck him. "The man you saved, his name is David Chun, no relation. He has a substance abuse problem, but he's in recovery now. He came by earlier to thank you, but you were sleeping. He left this." Alexander handed her a crumpled piece of paper with shaky handwriting. "You gave me a reason to stay clean. Thank you for my life." Tears welled in Maria's eyes. "He doesn't need to thank me." "Yes, he does. And so do I." She looked at him, puzzled. "I've employed you for 6 months," Alexander continued, "and I never asked you anything about yourself. I never learned that you care for your mother, or that you work 2 other jobs, or that you're the kind of person who jumps in front of trains to save strangers. I treated you like furniture. Expensive, necessary furniture that I'd be irritated to replace, but furniture nonetheless. Mr. Chin, you don't have to." "I do. Because you risked your life for a stranger, and I can't remember the last time I inconvenienced myself for anyone. Because you have more courage in your broken body than I've had in my entire privileged life." Maria was quiet for a long moment. "You're being very kind, Mr. Chin, but you don't need to feel guilty. You've always been professional, and that's all an employer owes an employee. What if I want to owe you more than that? What if I want to try being something other than just professional?" She studied him carefully. "Why?" It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer. Alexander thought about the past 2 days, about everything he'd felt and realized. "Because I'm 33 years old, worth billions, and I'm not sure I've ever done anything that actually mattered. Because you're 27, working 3 jobs, and you matter more in 1 day than I do in a year. Because I want to learn how to be good instead of just successful." A nurse interrupted them to check Maria's vitals and administer medication. As the nurse worked, Alexander noticed the stack of medical bills already accumulating on Maria's bedside table. The anxiety in her eyes every time she glanced at them. After the nurse left, he spoke carefully. "I've arranged for your medical expenses to be covered through a company assistance program. And I'm paying you full salary for 3 months while you recover." "I can't accept that," Maria said immediately. "It's too much. It's not charity. Consider it disability pay. And before you argue, think about your mother. She needs you healthy, not rushing back to work and re-injuring yourself." Maria's resistance wavered at the mention of Esperanza. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes. Or just don't say no." That week became a pattern. Each morning, Alexander visited Esperanza, helping her with groceries, making sure she had her medications, sitting with her while she talked about Maria's childhood. Each afternoon, he went to the hospital, often bringing food for Maria and her mother, staying for hours that became evening. He met Maria's friends, women like her who worked multiple jobs, who laughed despite their exhaustion, who shared food and childcare and dreams. He met her church community, who organized prayer vigils and brought homemade meals. He saw an entire ecosystem of care that existed without wealth, based purely on human connection. On Friday, a week after the accident, something shifted. Maria was sitting up in bed, still in pain but stronger, and she asked him, Why are you really here, Mr. Chin? Alexander, he said. Please call me Alexander. Alexander, then. Why are you really here? You've spent more time with me this week than in the 6 months I worked for you. You're missing work, which I know is important to you. So why? He'd been asking himself the same question. Honestly, at first it was guilt. Then it was curiosity. But now... He paused, searching for the right words. Now I'm here because I want to be. Because these are the best conversations I've had in years. Because your mother taught me how to make arroz con leche yesterday, and it was the most fun I've had since I can't remember when. Because I'm starting to understand that I've been succeeding at all the wrong things. Maria was quiet, processing this. I don't know what to say to that. You don't have to say anything. I just want you to know that you've already given me more than I've given you, even with all the medical bills paid. What have I given you? A mirror, he said simply, and the courage to look in it. That evening, as he left the hospital, Alexander encountered Rosa in the hallway. She studied him with the same assessing look she'd given him a week ago. She talks about you, Rosa said. Maria. She says you're different than she thought. I'm trying to be. Why? It was the same question Maria had asked, but Rosa's tone was more challenging. Because I don't want to be the person I was a week ago. Rosa nodded slowly. That's a good answer. But Mr. Chun, be careful. Maria is kind, and she's been through a lot. Don't become someone's redemption story if you're not ready to follow through. The warning was clear and fair. I understand. Do you? Because Maria doesn't have the luxury of trying on compassion like a new suit to see if it fits. For her, caring about people is survival. Make sure you know the difference before you make promises with your presence. The words stung, but they were true. Alexander nodded, accepting the rebuke. That night, alone in his penthouse, he stood at his windows one more time. But instead of seeing an empire, he saw a hospital room where a woman was learning to walk again. He saw a small apartment in Queens where an elderly woman prayed for her daughter. He saw his own reflection, and for the first time in years, he wasn't sure he liked what he saw. But he was sure, finally, that he wanted to change it. 3 weeks after the accident, Maria came home. Alexander had spent those weeks in a strange double life, managing his company remotely while spending his afternoons and evenings in Queens. His board was growing concerned, his competitors were circling, and his assistant kept hinting that his unusual behavior was becoming a topic of gossip in tech circles. He didn't care. He'd arranged for a hospital bed to be installed in the Rodriguez apartment, for a physical therapist to come daily, for a home health aide to assist Esperanza with Maria's care. He'd done it all through intermediaries and fictional programs, maintaining the fiction that this was standard employee support rather than personal intervention. The day Maria came home, Alexander arrived to find the small apartment full of people, neighbors, friends from church, Rosa, and her family. Someone had cooked, and music played softly. It was a celebration, warm and alive in a way his penthouse had never been. Maria sat in a wheelchair by the window, her legs still in a cast, but her face brighter than he'd seen it. When she spotted him in the doorway, her smile widened. Alexander. You came. The easy use of his first name still surprised him, though he'd insisted on it for days. Of course. He navigated through the crowd, feeling overdressed in his designer jeans and cashmere sweater, but no one seemed to notice or care. Esperanza pressed food into his hands, tamales she'd made that morning despite her arthritis. A neighbor's child showed him a drawing. Someone asked his opinion on whether the Knicks had any chance this season. He was simply Alexander here, not Alexander Chin the billionaire, and the anonymity was intoxicating. As the afternoon wore on and guests gradually departed, Alexander found himself alone with Maria and Esperanza. The older woman excused herself for her afternoon rest, leaving them in comfortable silence. Thank you, Maria said finally, for everything. I know the company assistance program isn't really a company program. Alexander froze. How did you? Rosa called the HR number on the letter. It went to a virtual assistant service that had clearly been set up 2 weeks ago. Maria's expression was gentle, not accusatory. You're not as sneaky as you think. He had the grace to look embarrassed. I didn't want you to refuse help because of pride. It was pride that made you hide it, she said, but she was smiling. You didn't want me to know how much you cared. The observation was too accurate. Alexander sat down across from her. Why didn't you say anything? Because I understood why you did it. And because. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. Because I've been watching you these past few weeks. You're different. Not just with me, with everyone. You talked to the neighbors, you helped Mrs. Alvarez fix her sink, you spent 2 hours teaching Tommy how to code. You're present in a way that rich people usually aren't. I'm learning, he admitted. You live in a different world than I do. A better one, in some ways. Better? Maria laughed, but not unkindly. Alexander, I work 3 jobs I'll probably lose. My mother and I live in a 1-bedroom apartment where the heat doesn't always work. I haven't been on a vacation since I was 12. Your world has advantages mine doesn't. But you have something I don't. Connection. Purpose. You know why you get up in the morning. I get up because the bills don't pay themselves. That's not all it is, he insisted. You get up because your mother needs you. Because your church community counts on you. Because you'd rather risk your life than watch a stranger die. You have meaning, Maria. I have money. She was quiet for a long moment. You could have both, you know. Money doesn't have to mean isolation. Doesn't it? Everyone in my world wants something from me. Every relationship is transactional. Even my friends, especially my friends, are really business contacts who play golf with me. That's not because you're rich. It's because you chose to build your life that way. Her directness should have offended him, but instead it felt like relief. You could choose differently. I'm trying to. I'm not sure I know how. Maria leaned forward, wincing slightly at the movement. Start small. The bodega owner on the corner, Mr. Kim? Learn his name. The doorman at your building? Ask about his family. The barista who makes your coffee? Notice that she's a person with dreams and fears and bills to pay. That simple? That hard, she corrected. Because it means caring about people who can't do anything for you. It means being present even when it's inconvenient. It means accepting that you can't control everything, including how people perceive you. Alexander absorbed this. Is that what you do? Care about people who can't do anything for you? Everyone can do something for you, even if it's just teaching you how to be human. She smiled. You're teaching me right now. Me? What am I possibly teaching you? That people can change. That wealth doesn't have to mean emptiness. That maybe I was wrong to judge all rich people by the few I'd met. She paused. And you're teaching my mother that there are still good people in the world, which is a gift after everything she's lost. The weight of that responsibility settled on him. I don't want to disappoint her. Or you. Then don't, Maria said simply. Keep showing up. Keep being present. Keep trying to be good instead of just successful. Over the next 2 weeks, Alexander did exactly that. He restructured his work schedule, delegating more, working from Queens several days a week. He helped Maria with her physical therapy, encouraged her when the pain made her want to quit. He learned to cook Dominican food from Esperanza, sat with her during her dialysis appointments, listened to stories about her childhood in a mountain village he'd never heard of. He met Maria's scattered family through video calls, cousin still in Mexico, her brother Miguel in Tijuana trying to find a legal way back to the U.S. He heard Miguel's story, the pain of being separated from his mother and sister, the frustration of a system that had punished him for his parents' choice to seek a better life. Could you help him? Maria asked one evening, her voice careful. With your resources, your lawyers? Could you help Miguel come home? It was a test, Alexander realized. Not a malicious one, but a test nonetheless. Would he use his privilege only for his own redemption, or would he extend it to help someone he'd never met? I'll try, he said. No promises, but I'll get my immigration attorneys to review his case. The hope that flooded Maria's face was worth more than any stock option or acquisition. But it was a Tuesday afternoon, 6 weeks after the accident, when everything truly shifted. Alexander was helping Maria practice walking with her crutches in the apartment when Esperanza suddenly clutched her chest and collapsed. Time fractured. Alexander was on the phone with 911, performing CPR based on instructions from the dispatcher, while Maria screamed for her mother. The ambulance seemed to take forever. In the hospital, while Esperanza was in emergency surgery for a heart attack, Maria broke down completely. Alexander held her while she sobbed. This woman who'd been so strong through her own trauma, now shattered by the thought of losing her mother. He didn't offer empty platitudes or false promises. He just held her, let her cry, and promised that whatever happened, she wouldn't face it alone. Esperanza survived, but barely. The doctors said her heart was weak, the damage extensive. She would need constant care, expensive medications, possibly another surgery. "I can't afford this," Maria whispered in the hospital waiting room at 3 a.m. "I can't lose her, but I can't afford to save her." "You won't have to," Alexander said. "I'll cover it. All of it. And before you argue, Maria, please understand. This isn't charity. This is me being part of your family, and families help each other." She looked at him through tears. "We're not your family." "You could be," he said quietly. "If you'd let me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning neither was quite ready to examine. In the pale fluorescent lights of the hospital, watching Maria keep vigil by her mother's bedside, Alexander understood that he'd crossed some invisible line. This wasn't about assuaging guilt anymore. It wasn't about learning to be a better person. It was about love, for Maria, for Esperanza, for the life they'd built despite everything the world had thrown at them. It was about belonging to something bigger than himself, something that couldn't be quantified in stock prices or market share. And it terrified him. 2 months after Esperanza's heart attack, Alexander stood in his penthouse apartment, looking at the for-sale listing his real estate agent had prepared. The photos made it look spectacular but sterile, a showpiece, not a home. His phone buzzed with the 10th message that day from his board of directors. They were threatening a vote of no confidence. His behavior had become erratic, they said. He was distracted. He'd missed 3 consecutive board meetings, delegated major decisions, and worst of all, he'd announced a new initiative to provide comprehensive health care and living wages to all contract workers in his company's supply chain, a move that would cost millions and cut into profit margins. His competitors smelled blood in the water. His investors were nervous. By every metric that had mattered to him a year ago, he was failing. And yet, he'd never been happier. The penthouse door opened, and Maria came in, still walking with a slight limp but no longer needing crutches. In the 4 months since her accident, she'd been coming to the penthouse twice a week, not as his maid, but as his friend. Teaching him to cook, helping him sort through what to keep and what to donate, gradually transforming the sterile space into something that felt lived in. "You're really doing this," she said, looking at the listing. "Selling this place." "I am. I found a building in Queens, near your apartment. 3 floors, 1 for me, 1 for my office, and 1 I'm converting into a community center. Coding classes for kids, small business resources, that kind of thing." Maria shook her head, smiling. "The board must love that. The board wants me out. They think I've lost my mind." "Have you?" He considered the question seriously. "Maybe. Or maybe I found it. I'm not sure there's a difference." They worked together to pack boxes. Alexander sorting through years of accumulated possessions that meant nothing, Maria occasionally stopping him when he tried to donate something worth keeping. It was comfortable, easy in a way his previous relationships never had been. "How's your mother?" he asked, carefully wrapping a piece of art he decided to keep, a painting Esperanza had mentioned admiring. "Stronger every day. She started volunteering at the church again, which her doctor says she shouldn't do, but you try stopping her." Maria paused. "She asks about you constantly. I think she's planning our wedding." The comment was meant as a joke, but it landed awkwardly. Their relationship had evolved into something neither quite knew how to define. More than friendship, but constrained by the history of employer and employee, by the vast difference in their circumstances, by the fear of ruining something precious by wanting too much. Would that be the worst thing? Alexander asked quietly. Maria looked at him, startled. What? Us. Together. Would it be the worst thing? Alexander. She set down the box she was holding. You know it's not that simple. Why not? Because 4 months ago, I cleaned your floors. Because you're you, and I'm me. Because people would say I was using you for money, or you were having some kind of crisis, and I was just convenient. I don't care what people say. But I do. And you should too, because those people are your world. Your board, your investors, your friends. They're not my friends, he interrupted. I'm starting to realize they never were. The people at your mother's birthday party last month? Rosa and her family, the neighbors who bring food every Sunday, even Mr. Kim from the bodega, who taught me to play dominoes? Those are friends. The rest are just business associates I mistook for a life. Maria sat down on the couch he'd already arranged to donate. This is a lot, Alexander. You're making huge changes very fast. Are you sure this is what you want, or is it just rebellion against the life you had? It was a fair question. He sat beside her, taking her hand. A year ago, I was worth $3 billion, and I couldn't tell you the last time I felt genuinely happy. Now I'm worth slightly less because I've been giving it away. My company might vote me out, and I'm happier than I've ever been. That's not rebellion. That's clarity. And what about me? What am I in all this clarity? You're the woman I'm falling in love with, he said simply. If you'll have me. Not because you were my maid, not because I'm trying to save you or you're trying to reform me, but because you see me, really see me, and somehow don't run away. Tears gathered in Maria's eyes. You barely know me. I know you risk your life for strangers. I know you work yourself to exhaustion for your mother. I know you make terrible jokes when you're nervous and you sing off-key when you cook. I know your favorite color is purple because it was your grandmother's favorite. I know you wanted to be a teacher before life got in the way. What else do I need to know? That I'm scared, she whispered. That I don't know how to be with someone like you. That I'm terrified you'll wake up one day and realize you've made a terrible mistake. Then we'll be scared together. Maria, I don't have all the answers. I don't know if my company will survive this transition, or if I'll be any good at the life I'm trying to build. But I know I want to try, and I want to try with you. She was quiet for a long time, and Alexander held his breath. Finally, she spoke. My mother likes you. That's important to me. I like her too. She's teaching me Spanish, and I'm teaching her to use an iPad. It's a fair trade. Maria laughed through her tears. You're ridiculous. Is that a yes? It's a we'll see. Let's take this slowly and figure it out as we go. Don't propose to me in a half-packed penthouse surrounded by boxes. That's fair. He pulled her close and she let him. For what it's worth, when I do propose, if I get to propose, it'll be somewhere better than this. You're very confident for someone whose board is trying to fire him. Let them. I've got a backup plan. Over the next 3 months, Alexander's life transformed in ways that would have seemed impossible a year ago. His board did vote him out as CEO, but he retained enough shares to maintain significant influence. He appointed a successor he trusted and shifted his focus to the foundation he'd created, dedicated to supporting working families, immigrant communities, and educational opportunities. He sold the penthouse for an obscene amount of money and donated half the proceeds. The building in Queens became his home and headquarters, and true to his word, the 3rd floor opened as a community center. Maria helped run it, finally using the teaching skills she'd shelved years ago. They dated slowly, carefully, navigating the complexities of their unconventional beginning. Alexander met Maria's extended family, learned their stories, invested in their dreams. He helped Miguel finally secure legal entry back to the U.S., witnessed the reunion between mother, daughter, and son that left everyone in tears. Esperanza's health stabilized with proper care. She moved into a larger apartment Alexander had purchased in the same building as Maria, close enough for daily visits, but far enough for independence. She became the unofficial grandmother of the community center, always present, always ready with food or advice or fierce hugs. Alexander learned what it meant to be part of a community. He learned to code alongside 12-year-olds, to share meals with families whose names he knew, to show up for baptisms and quinceañeras and funerals. He learned that wealth meant nothing if you had no one to share it with, and that the richest life was measured in connections, not dollars. 1 year after Maria's accident, Alexander organized a celebration at the community center. Over 100 people came, the ever-expanding circle of friends, neighbors, and found family that had become his world. As the party wound down, he found Esperanza sitting quietly in a corner, watching everyone with a satisfied smile. "You look happy, Mrs. Rodriguez," he said, sitting beside her. "I am happy. You made my daughter happy. You gave us a family again." She patted his hand. "I knew. From the first day, when you came to my apartment with scared eyes. I knew you were the one God sent to us. I think you have it backward. Maria, and you saved me." "Maybe we saved each other," Esperanza said. "That's what family does." Later that night, Alexander and Maria stood on the roof of their building, looking out at the Queen's skyline. It wasn't as dramatic as the view from his penthouse had been, but it felt real in a way that sterile perfection never had. "Are you happy?" Maria asked, echoing her mother's question. "Deliriously," he said. "Terrifyingly. Completely. Even though you're not a CEO anymore? Even though your old friends think you've lost your mind? Especially because of that. I was dying in that life, Maria. I just didn't know it until you showed me what living actually looked like." She leaned against him, and they stood in comfortable silence. Finally, she spoke again. "For the record, I'm falling in love with you too. Have been for months. I was just too scared to say it. And now I'm still scared. But I'm more scared of not taking the chance." "That's good enough for me." They stayed on that roof until the sky started to lighten, talking about dreams and plans and the beautiful, complicated life they were building together. A life that wasn't perfect, wasn't easy, but was rich in all the ways that mattered. 3 years later, Alexander stood in that same building, now renovated and expanded, hosting the wedding of his nightmares, or rather, the wedding Esperanza had been planning since the day she met him. 200 guests, half of whom he'd never met but who Maria assured him were practically family, filled the community center-turned-reception hall. Miguel walked Maria down the aisle. Esperanza sobbed in the front row. Rosa served as maid of honor, still giving Alexander skeptical looks, but now tinged with grudging approval. The tech world was barely represented, a handful of former colleagues who'd understood his transformation, but none of the board members or investors who'd called him crazy. As Maria reached him at the altar, Alexander saw his reflection in her eyes and finally recognized the man looking back. Not a billionaire, though he still had considerable wealth. Not a tech genius or visionary leader. Just a man who'd learned that the best investment he'd ever made was in human connection, and the greatest return was love. "Ready?" Maria whispered as they prepared to say their vows. "For the rest of my life," he answered.
And he meant it.
The boy who'd built an empire from code and ambition had grown into a man who measured success in smaller, more precious currencies, Sunday dinners with extended family, teaching kids to program, watching Esperanza's face light up when Miguel visited, holding Maria's hand while they planned their future. He'd been humbled by meeting his maid's mother, yes. But more than that, he'd been saved, transformed, given a second chance to build a life that mattered. And as he kissed his wife, while their chosen family cheered, Alexander Chin finally understood what it meant to be truly, completely, impossibly rich.